Thank you all for coming back. It's been a bit of a race. We had whatever it is, a quarter-mile driveway from the Graham Center back over here. Let's get started. It's 2 p.m. This is a star-studded panel that we're very glad to have and honored and privileged to have Executive Dean Michael Heithaus here to moderate the panel and kick things off. Thank you, Dean Heithaus. Oh, Galen, Treuer.
Oh, Galen. Oh, there. Excellent. I don't know, Mario. That is by South Florida times. I think we're starting about 7 minutes early here, but we'll try to stay on good old Midwestern time. So thank you everyone for being here. Most of you got that post-lunch exercise on the walk back from the Graham Center, and what we're going to talk about in this panel today is about as critical as it gets for South Florida. You know, coastal resilience. That's pretty much. Everything here is coastal. But I think the one thing that we want to be talking about when we're talking about the challenges, opportunities we have, climate tech, I think probably every panel at this conference needs to be asked at some point in time, what is climate tech? But I think the other thing for me is expanding when we think about coastal resilience. I mean, a lot of times the image that pops to mind is about buildings and the built environment, but here that coastal resilience really is from the ecosystems and natural areas that support our coastal human communities all the way through the coasts, and here everything that's behind the coasts is affecting our coasts as well. So this is everything from coastal oceans to the Everglades is really important to be thinking about from a tech perspective. I also tend to get stuck on the term resilience. Because a lot of times when we think about resilience, we're talking about bouncing back from extreme events. But there's part of that resistance, too, of how do we just hang in there and kind of take the beating that is coming in some situations, and how do our ecosystems manage to not have to bounce back, but be kind of resistant to change as well. What we're going to try to do with this panel today is our distinguished panel. I'm going to introduce all of them to start with instead of breaking it up with introductions as we go along. And then I'm hoping what we can do at the end, rather than maybe having a series of questions, is to have more of a discussion amongst the entire audience as we think about what's going forward. And some of our panelists don't know what order they're going in yet. So here's where we get the big reveal on how we're going to do this, which is always fun. And we're going to have Dr. Jim Fourqurean go first. He's the professor in our Department of Biological Sciences, actually a distinguished university professor. And you can see I'm trying to kill time here as we let people filter in as well. And he's the director of our Coastline and Ocean Division within our Institute of Environment. And Jim, your assignment is to frame up some of the challenges that we have for our local ecosystems and what that really means in terms of thinking forward towards solutions. Then I'm going to turn it over to Pippa Brashear, who is an MA in urban design and landscape architecture from Harvard. And she is the resilience principal at SCAPE and is really an expert in resilience planning and design. And that brings in not just the latest engineering solutions, but also thinking about natural solutions, but with a critical eye toward the sustainability and justice issues within our human community as well. So she's going to kind of start to frame up some of those design solutions we have for dealing with the challenges that we face. After that, I'm going to ask Dr. Todd Crowl to focus on some of the monitoring and how do we know what's out there, what do we have to respond to in the environment, and what do we need to do to build the infrastructure to be able to be adaptive in the face of the challenges we have in these coastal systems. And Todd is our director of our Institute of Environment here at FIU, and before coming here was really focused on a lot of water resilience and sustainability issues in Utah, which is obviously very coastal. We hope it stays that way. Well, Cretaceous, it was coastal then. But he's been leading a lot of the efforts here locally to make sure that we are Biscayne Bay and the surrounding human communities are able to thrive in the face of the challenges. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with Dr. Galen Treuer, who is the Climate Tech and Economic Innovation Manager in Miami-Dade County. Fellow OB grad from undergraduate from Oberlin College. But his PhD is really focused, his PhD work and then work since then is focused on risk and response to sea level rise, but also to the extreme events, not just here in South Florida, but also up in Connecticut. So we've got a great panel to frame this, get the discussion started, and really looking forward to seeing where we go. And if you forget your assignment, I'll remind you before we go. But first, Jim, can you frame up some of the challenges we're facing?
I will certainly try. Thank you. You know when you show up at class and you didn't do your homework and didn't even know what it was? That's the situation I'm finding myself in. So when I think of coastal resilience, to me, coastal resilience is a given for coastal communities. That's ecological communities, but it is not a given for human communities. So I'm going to talk about the resilience of the human systems and their reliance on the natural system. So I wanted to frame the challenges. Biggest challenge is Florida is flat and barely above sea level, right? There is no slope. You got to go hundreds of miles to get over 20 feet above sea level. So it's very flat. And another challenge is the coastline of the world has always changed. Sea levels have come up and they've gone down, and they've done this multitude of times. Sea levels have been 450 feet lower and 350 feet higher as climate phases move from glaciation to deglaciation. Humans evolved 10,000, 15,000 years ago. Our communities evolved at a time when sea level rise slowed way down. So about 15,000 years ago, the rate of sea level rise slowed down, and that led to a very slow movement of the ocean-land interface, because sea level stopped coming up so fast. And that allowed for the development of all these mega cities all along our coast, the development of all this infrastructure that cost a lot of money and cost a lot of money to protect. But in the last 100 years, human activity has managed to drastically increase that rate of sea level rise, well past what we can tell from the geologic record has ever happened before. So we're going from one of the most quiescent periods of sea level rise over the history of our species to now the most rapid rate of change. And of course, the rate of change of sea level, we can all walk fast enough to not drown, but the stuff we built that cost so much money is being left behind. So the challenges we've got: increasing CO2 in the atmosphere, increasing temperatures leading to increasing water levels. Those increasing water levels leading to coastal flooding and attack of our infrastructure. There's increased temperatures leads to increased energy in the ocean, and that energy in the ocean pours over to more and greater storm energy attacking our coastline. So those are the challenges, and we cannot see these getting better, these challenges lessening in the next 100 years as we try to figure out how to re-engineer the climate to that quiescent period so we can build things that are meant to last 100 years without watching them go underwater. But we want to make sure in the future that these places that we want to protect remain livable. And I don't know, anybody watch the basic cable TV series, The Expanse? All right, so The Expanse has some of the most...
Didn't that move to Amazon Prime?
It could have, no. But to me, the most remarkable thing about the entire series has nothing to do with asteroids. It's about New York City and the United Nations and the neighborhood of the United Nations. And they have done a masterful job projecting what a seawall-protected New York City is going to look like in 300 years. And they never make a point about it. It's just in the background. And what you see in the background is this city, New York, that so many people love, surrounded by 30-foot tall walls with very small gates that you can go out between them. So, people live on the coast because it's beautiful. People live on the coast because it's a pleasant place to live. How pleasant is it to look up at 30 feet from street level. You get a little bit of a flavor of this if you walk in the streets of New Orleans along the Mississippi River. You can't see the river, and you look up, and there's an oil tanker going by, and the bottom of the oil tanker is above your head. So do we really want to live in a place like that is one question. Now, those kinds of places, those seawalls are no longer functioning coastal ecological communities. They're just walls that reflect energy and increase the problems. Waves hit a wall, and when they reflect off, they cause more and more erosion. So natural coastal ecosystems are way more resilient on their own. But let's talk about the things we like about them. They make living in the coast so much better. They provide numerous valuable goods and services, like it makes Miami beautiful, right? That beauty actually translates into housing values. It enhances biodiversity, the number and kinds of things we see, which also relates right back to the tourism industry. The coastal ecosystems around us supply all kinds of food for us, the spiny lobsters and the stone crab. I'm a stone crab fisherman. There's a lot of food that comes out of the ocean. But there's a lot of climate regulation that comes out of the ocean too. And as we lose these coastal ecosystems that are among the most carbon-dense ecosystems in the world, we will just be exacerbating the rate of environmental change that we're trying to stay resilient in the face of. Those coastal ecosystems are really important for water quality regulation. It was the most valuable service of any ecosystem in the world, where in 1997 groundbreaking paper was the value that seagrasses play for Chesapeake Bay sewage treatment. So they basically take the bad stuff and send it into the atmosphere. And these natural coastal ecosystems also protect our built environment. They absorb wave energy, they stop erosion. And so all these things make our built environment safer and more pleasant, which to me suggests makes it more sustainable and a place that people want to continue to live. Now, unlike those engineered seawalls from the Expanse, coastal ecosystems, natural ecosystems generally can repair themselves. Hurricane comes through a mangrove forest rebuilds. They also can accrete sediment to some extent. So there are plenty of places in the world where there's enough sediment coming down that the coastline, even though the relative sea level rise is coming up, the sea level's not moving because we're still building up sediment. But once you get rid of that shallow slope and put in a seawall, it reflects the energy, and you lose all of that. So in order for us to keep these valuable resources around into the future, to make those future environments sustainable, we need to provide space for those things to move. So our coastal ecosystems, if you think a mangrove forest or a salt marsh or a seagrass meadow like I work in, those things can move up, but in order to move up, they also have to move back. And if you think about our slope, when you get right down to the coastline, you've got about a 30-degree slope only for the first 10 or 15 meters, right? So that's a 3, 4, 5 triangle. That means for every 3 inches that the sea level comes up, the coastline is going to retreat 5 inches. So we have to figure out, and we call that leaving room for the retreat of these coastal ecosystems, we call that providing accommodation space so that we can have these important ecosystems to support our human environment into the future. So we need, as we're thinking to manage these landscapes, we need to manage these landscapes not just to protect the things that cost $1 billion, but also protect the things that protect those things that cost $1 billion. And I think I can end setting the stage with a cautionary tale. I don't know how many of you guys have been to China and had the experience of driving the coast. The Great Wall of China is fabulous. It's 6,000 kilometers long, built hundreds and hundreds of years ago to keep out the Mongol hordes. It's impressive. Everybody knows about it. But that's not the biggest wall in China. The biggest wall in China runs from Vietnam to North Korea. It's a seawall. There's over 11,000 kilometers of seawall. That's twice as long as the Great Wall of China. That basically cuts off all the coastal ecosystems from the ocean. And they did that starting in the 1960s. So the entire coastline is now covered with seawalls. And that's basically cut people's access to the ocean off. And it's also cut the ocean off from providing for the development of these natural ecosystems. They've lost all protection from coastal ecosystems because of the seawalls. And now what they're trying to do is fix that by repairing or creating natural coastal ecosystems on the outside of the seawall that was too deep for coastal ecosystems before they even built the seawall in the 1960s. So they're trying really hard now, and they're spending billions of dollars trying to recreate coastal ecosystems in a place that the only way they can do it is by dredging 100 miles offshore, bringing mud in and piling it up to try to recreate those coastal ecosystems. So I hope we don't get to a place where we look like New York City and the Great Expanse in Miami, where we've got a 30-foot wall surrounding the city with no mangroves left to protect us from storm surge, nothing there to buffer that energy, nothing there to produce the food that we all love and keep the water clear. So that's, to me, what I see as the challenge.
Thanks, Jim. And I think that that flows perfectly into some of the things we're going to hear from Pippa.
I would say I have screenshot that image from the Expanse and used it in the presentation before.
I was going to be really impressed if that all of a sudden popped up on your slides right now. So let's pull the slides up, and I think we hear about why these are important, and we need to give them space. But the other thing we can do is incorporate them directly into our planning of how we begin to.
That's not me.
That is. Next slides.
Tiffany, you want to go next?
This is going to be a choose-your-own panel as we go along. Tiffany, are you ready? We've moved you up 2 hours.
But yeah, I'm Pippa Brashear. I'm a resilience principal at SCAPE, Landscape Architecture. In some ways I feel a little fish out of water because I'm not a policy person. I'm not in academia. I'm building landscapes in our built environment. But a big part, is it coming up? Is it going to come up or no?
It's going to come up.
A big part of, I'm a landscape architect. I'm based in New York City. We also have offices in New Orleans and San Francisco. And we design landscapes at all scales. We're designing, plazas and large parks, but we also kind of work at this infrastructural scale of landscape, and I would say a huge part of our work in our portfolio is in the land-water interface. I don't like to think of the water and the waterfront as a line, but rather a place. And we pride ourselves on innovation on the waterfront, be it sort of a new public waterfront for Memphis that opened last year. We also work with communities to plan and design for resilience. So working at the scale of a city or a neighborhood or a campus, we're really helping to, sorry. I walk around. Really trying to work to envision resilient futures and help set cities and communities on a path to that. We also build resilient infrastructure. This is one of our Living Breakwaters project in New York Harbor that I'm going to talk about a little more tomorrow. And we've gotten a lot of awards and recognitions for that. So I hope that it kind of qualifies me to speak today about, what does it take? What are the principles that we need to think about to build what we call nature-based infrastructure, nature-based adaptation, living landscapes for resilient cities, as you really introduced, right? We have these ecosystems we need to protect for ourselves as well as the services they provide to us. It's not just because we, love plants and animals in the ocean, even though most of us do. But first of all, and you don't really have much more to say, you've got to embrace change, right? You're working in the coastal, let's not even talk about climate change for a minute. Over the course of tidal cycle, over the day, our shorelines are these wildly dynamic places, our coastal environments. So what makes us think that we can have a static engineered solution to them? These adaptation strategies need to be flexible, adaptable, maintainable. Now, after this morning, I should have picked a new map. This is just a prompt and a graphic to say, but climate change is here. And no matter what rate we think is happening or what we think caused it, we're shifting the conversation here from mitigation to adaptation. It's locked in. No matter what solutions or scenarios in the future, they're all going to involve behavior change for all of us. They're all going to involve changes for our built environment. They're all going to involve changes in our natural environment. The question for us is not whether that's going to happen. It's whether we actually choose to proactively manage it and what we do about it, right? Because the consequence is this. This is the land loss map for coastal Louisiana from the last coastal restoration plan. To be dramatic, I chose the high scenario, not the low scenario, but the blue is like land converted to water in the next 50 years, right? So the scale at which we need to act. I'm usually talking about this, we need to scale up. I feel like after this morning, I'm actually bringing the scale down. But these natural systems know no political or jurisdictional boundaries, right? So we need to act at the scale of landscapes. And that's one of the things that there are planning plans and processes out there like CPRA that are kind of implementing projects. And, this is a huge scale, massive infrastructure to move sediment, right? To reconnect sediment with the marshes, as well as do some hard protection for land gains. And, looked at this scale, that actually looks modest, but that's the level of investment it takes even to sort of preserve and adapt even a modest amount of our coastal marshes. The other thing is, though, we can't just be reacting. We need to envision resilient futures. I think one of the challenges in resilience planning and climate adaptation is it's often viewed as this very linear, like, okay, here are assets and what we have, climate change is coming, I'm gonna get flooded, and let's keep the water out. Well, resilience, just like what is resilience, right? Resilience is to adapt and thrive. It's not enough to survive. We want to actually enjoy and have high quality of life and have our basic needs met, as you said, in the future, right? So we need to think about what that means, right? That, in the future, we can have thriving ecosystems, but they can coexist with recreational and, water-based industry, right? Louisiana is not going to be successful if we lose all of the water-based industry that's there. Right? So, and that scales down to the city. We need to envision resilient cities and resilient futures, not just how to draw that line around the edge for coastal protection. This is an adaptation plan that we did in Boston in the neighborhood of Dorchester. It's a very long waterfront. And really, until this plan, a lot of the neighborhood plans in Boston, it was really like, they're trying to keep the water out, right? Boston is low, it's flooding. They filled in all their waterfronts, and now the water's rising. But we said, well, is it always the highest and best use to do that? And when you're able to kind of think through and vision options, but also talk about the quality of life and economic benefits of those options, you come to different solutions. So if I'm just trying to draw a line to keep the water out around every single piece of property and land that's there, I end up with the bottom image. Okay, but was that sports building that was I think it's like a gym now, that was built in the 1970s and is probably going to get redeveloped and torn down in a couple of years anyways, the highest and best use and even economically most efficient and what people in the neighborhood actually want? Or do you create space for marsh migration and restore that natural edge, which achieves a lot of other goals for the neighborhood and community? And so we need to start from where we want to be, just not what we're reacting to. And to give a really case in point, of this, we need to revive landscape systems. I think the other fallacy is just saying, oh, don't touch it, preserve it. It's not enough anymore. We have altered our environment so much globally, regionally, that our ecosystems can't keep up on themselves. They need to help, right? So this is a relatively healthy marsh on the Neponset River as part of that waterfront. And what we found is that, that marsh that was cut off from its historic sediment supply. So it's not able to keep up with sea level rise. And with our partners at Woods Hole Group, who are the coastal engineers who modeled this, he said, if you could adaptively manage that marsh to keep up with sea level rise, you would reduce the extent of storm surge flooding, not just tidal flooding, like in a 100-year storm. And that was the difference between a transit line flooding and not. So what are you going to do? Build a bunch of expensive walls or help the marsh keep up with sea level rise, right? So when we start to open up new trade-offs and think about landscape as infrastructure, we come up with these new solutions. Reality is, we've destroyed a lot of those ecosystems. So if you look, this is our Living Breakwaters project in Staten Island. If you looked at this shot 200 years ago, you would have seen a wide, shallow water coastal habitat, a shelf of oyster reefs and eelgrass that dampened the wave energy and stopped erosion. But you know what? Through dredging, overfishing, water pollution, we decimated that population. And I can't snap my fingers and get it back. We're working with a lot of partners. New York is doing massive efforts to restore oyster ecosystems, but it's just a decimated population. Also, the regulations aren't going to let you fill a mile wide area, even if it is oysters. We'll permit, that'll take 30 years to permit on its own, right? So we said, well, what can we do? We can design, these breakwaters that modify wave action, that trap sediment on the beach and build back those beaches, but they also provide those other ecosystem services that the oysters did, right? They can grow oysters and other modal invertebrates that, raise the water, that help give back to water quality. They provide structured habitat for different type of juvenile fish. And that is how we start to also cohabit our urban landscapes, right? We're not just designing for ourselves, we're designing for those ecosystems and the vast array of species they support, right? We all got these questions, why are you showing a harbor seal on this breakwater? And, that it was an active construction site, and there they are hauling out because we designed the structures to attract fish and create space for them to do it. But we need to think about that. But we can't forget people, right? People want to live by the coast because it's a great place to live. We want to play on the beach. We want to play in the water. They don't want to live next to a giant seawall. This is an inland project in Lexington, Kentucky. It's really about a multimodal corridor and a stream daylighting, but it's engaging. It's beautiful. People want to live there. You are not going to sustain interest in adaptation if it looks ugly, if it's a miserable place to live. That's also going to destroy the economy of our cities. And so I think it really is critical that we remember that landscape is infrastructure, whether it's there or we're making it. I like this shot because it sort of pairs the stream restoration in Jacksonville with the highway. This is the McCoy's Creek. They're restoring this corridor. And, it's under construction. It is a infrastructural scale piece of construction, right? This is the level of action, whether in building or managing our living infrastructure, that it's going to take. And so we do need to scale these ideas and these projects. And I think I'm really excited to be here today and with this group because, I think the barriers that we need to overcome are many that we're talking about here, right? So how, to get here, how do you model and iteratively test these ideas? We don't have that capability, but we've heard a lot about like AI and generative systems. The other thing is navigating. It took us 8 years to design and permit this. We're not going to get stuff enough done if that's everyone. So how do we actually apply those lessons learned and overcome regulatory barriers? And then, the sort of procurement process for these and the money that's there, not to build them, but actually to monitor, maintain, and adaptively manage them. It's not more expensive. It's just a different way of doing things, and that takes change. And the way that our funding systems are set up, to fund infrastructure in cities, federal funding for infrastructure, it's just not there. And we're not paying to monitor systems, understand how they work, and inform our adaptive management. So those are some of the themes that I hope we get to touch on, and hope we can all think about what we can all do to build adaptive infrastructure in our cities.
So Todd, perfect segue to monitoring. But I mean, the other thing that I'd love to hear you talk about in your remarks a little bit is kind of the dynamism we face that you heard about. I mean, you saw the video of the tidal fluctuations, but you got lots of that going on. You've got algal blooms, you've got temperature fluctuations, but then you also have that human infrastructure that has failure points. And part of this is not just climate, but it's the pressures of climate and sea level and just people living with aging infrastructure.
Right. And I think the panel after this is going to deal with a little bit of that stuff in terms of planning and policy a little bit. But perfect introduction from Jim about, so what are the problems? And then Pippa gave some really, really impressive potential solutions to restoration, increasing resilience. But how do we know? How do we know that these things worked? Right now, there's a mad scramble for green, gray, nature-based infrastructure solutions to enhance, maintain, create our coastal sustainability. But we try it. It's like spaghetti. You throw it against the wall and see what sticks. How do you know it sticks, right? So one of the disconnects I see, and NOAA, we had a workshop in DC not too long ago, and NOAA, people from NOAA came up to us and said, we've spent over $100 billion over the last couple decades on coastal restoration activities. Oh, what did we learn? How have we done? We don't really know. So, so the next new horizon for me and the great opportunity is we can do a much, much better job of assessing success through the new technological advances that we've got with us. It's really expensive and time-consuming to go out and build an artificial coral reef and collect enough data over a long enough time to say, this is something that works. And there's a mad scramble right now across the world for companies to develop new ecocrete, right? Concrete-based things that absorb CO2 or at least don't emit as much as natural CO2. There's a staggering number of companies out there working on the perfect sauce for that. There's a staggering number of 3D printing companies emerging saying, we can 3D print reefs, we can 3D print seawalls, we can 3D print all this stuff. With what materials? That, you know, there's a sweet spot there in getting the right materials and designing these things in a ecologically friendly way. But the real trick is going to be to assess success. And so we're now in an era where we have the development of robots, autonomous vehicles, and AI approaches to taking huge amounts of data and relatively quickly assessing it, binning it, categorizing it, and analyzing it in a quantitative way. So one of the things that I think we're lacking is sort of that repeatable, quantifiable rubric and approach to assessing success for all of these various kinds of green, gray, nature-based solutions to not only coastal resilience, to any kind of conservation or resilience actions we have. And so I think we have a great opportunity to push the envelope, to work with new kinds of sensors, to analyze bigger and bigger data sets. You know, if we throw a big artificial reef out off the coast of Florida, I can drive a drone around that thing in a half an hour and collect enough data to 100% categorize everything about that, the communities, the water chemistry, the circulation patterns. It takes a long time to analyze that data right now, and so the next big step is going to be the application of AI and being able to meld these various data sets together. But we have a great opportunity now to sort of say, this is what success looks like. These are the techniques and the rubrics that we need to assess success in a quantifiable, repeatable way. If you heard that great panel this afternoon, it was a fascinating discussion at lunch. Where's business in all this? Where's economics in all this? And now I'm setting up Galen. We don't have big banks and big people throwing money and creating green bonds and stocks at all of this stuff, because they don't know what the pluses and benefits are. There are a relatively few really rigorous publications on the cost-benefit analysis of hard versus gray versus green infrastructure. Those studies that exist, hands down, green infrastructure provides the best ROA by far. But there's a relatively small number of those kinds of papers out there. And so, you know, if we don't get the private sector and the business sector and the financial sector to get what we're doing and understand that it's in their best interest, as well as at a personal level, but also at a business level and an economic level, this is going to keep going slow, right? And so I think it's now upon us. There's a mad dash to find these solutions and find better building materials. And engineers are really great at solving problems right now, whatever is right in front of them. There's not so much thought about what happens after that. But now that there's a push for this new sort of approach to restoration, I'm confident we're going to find these better materials and these better methods. But what we now need to do, I think, is concentrate on this is why, not only from an ecosystem goods perspective, but from an economic perspective. This is why this is good, and this is why you should invest, and this is why we should push this sort of approach to sort of increasing resilience. And the point Pippa made is a great one. What I build today might not be worth anything in 10 years, even though it worked beautifully now, because the population changes, the water levels change, the climate changes, and the pressures just switch. How do we know? So unless we have those data that go along with what we're putting out there that allow us to learnedly, adaptively manage these situations, there's going to keep being this disconnect between the economic sector, the business sector, and sort of the conservation restoration sector trying to get this right. And I suspect the panel in a little while is going to address that as well. But that's really my sort of thing right now is let's apply technology. There's a ton of technological advances out there to collect data in a rigorous, repeatable way and to actually assess what is real success and not. One of my pet peeves, and this is what I use as why we need to do a much better job to impact policy and get the economic sector to embrace us is there are a number of really good studies that show if you have a good stand of mangroves in front of your house, so you build a house on the coast and you keep the mangroves that are there, and your neighbor builds a house and they cut down the mangroves because they want the view, and you get these huge storm surges, the house with the mangroves will suffer about 17% less physical and economic damage. How much less do they pay for insurance? Zero. They pay exactly the same amount of insurance. Why? That doesn't make any sense to me. Where's the incentive to leave the mangroves in front of your house? You're going to pay the same exact amount of insurance as the person next to you who doesn't have that great view, but has the protection for the next set of storms. It's those simple little disconnects that I think we really need to try to beat through and provide the right quantitative data and evidence to sort of make that linkage. And that's kind of why we've started this new environmental finance and risk management program at FIU. There's a connection there. We just need to make it better. Thanks.
So before I turn it over to Galen, I'm going to serve this one up for you on that. You mentioned really quickly, like, how do we get private industry involved, and how do they understand that investing in some of this infrastructure is in their best interest? But I would ask the question: is that necessarily the case? Because the speed at which things are built and flipped and profits are taken may not lead to kind of rational action for that first person who invests in the infrastructure to invest in even 10 years from now rather than 2. So I'm just curious, as you're dealing with innovation in climate tech in Miami-Dade County, is that one of those key issues of like who's building it versus the hot potato that gets passed and who suffers the consequences of maybe not building for the future?
Yeah, okay, that's an issue. All this stuff is really good, and this is a really good audience. I know a lot of you, I'm sure the ones I don't, are bringing a lot of expertise. I think everything built up to what Todd said, and I think he's right. We do have to prove this. We're not. I think we should just be honest about where we are. We're in a place where property values in South Florida have, if not doubled, increased a lot in the last few years, more than I ever thought they would. And that means that our risk is higher, right? And there are questions, legitimate questions raised about what nature-based solutions can do to protect this. And I think I had a very interesting conversation with some insurance folks from the UK yesterday. And they were talking about flood risk. Their flood insurance program is very different than ours. It's more privatized, but not entirely. But they said that their coastal risk is just not an issue. But it's not an issue. And it's not because they don't have a coastline, they're an island, right? But it's because they didn't build into the coast the way that we did, right? That's it. And they don't have to deal with it. They're not interested, the modeling doesn't matter as much. The Dutch, they have that problem. They are built in and below the coastline, so there's more there. But I think it's illustrative for us to think about that. The good news there, though, is that they do have issues with compound inland flooding, and we have expertise here. And I think we should connect with them, right? Because we have the modeling done because of our issues. So we have an extremely exposed coast, and we have to make sure that this cost-benefit analysis gets to somebody who wants to pay for it. And I don't think that they're going to pay for it until we get the cost-benefit analysis or the ROI. It's not really going to happen. And that ROI has to include the ecosystem benefits and the benefits to the community and the community health. And most of the time, that happens later. So like in our experience with the Army Corps down here, when we were looking at, do we build a wall or not, we were getting through 10% of the design, which is the time when you ask, do you build a wall or not, without doing ecosystem modeling or community benefits modeling. And that's an issue, right? And so because of that, we came up with a design that the community didn't want and didn't reflect, what we're willing to live with in terms of beauty, in terms of livability. And now we're in a new place, which is great, but it took a while. And I think that's just like to set up the story, and then I'm gonna focus a little bit on like what is happening. Like some exciting stuff here is that South Florida has been designated by the federal government, by EDA, as a tech hub. And that's the same region as the Compact, the Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact, which has been doing this shared planning for about 15 years. And what that means is that we are highlighted as a place to be a global center for innovation on climate resilient infrastructure. And we're kind of dreaming up what that looks like right now and pitching to the federal government to give us money to stand it up. And it's really exciting because it's attracting a ton of attention, and it's also making us think about, wait, what is a good return on investment? Where can we differentiate and really make a difference, and really drive to these investments? Because we're pretty aware from talking to NOAA and FEMA and DOD and just our own local modelers and the county's planning that we have some specific needs, particularly around the coast. So one of the things that we have proposed is to create what we're calling right now a Florida standard, but it is to create this rubric, right? So you put the money behind it so that we take our expertise that we have down here to look at the nature-based solutions or the hybrid infrastructure. Really, it's got to be hybrid because it can't just be nature. That zone is changing a lot, and we can lift it up a little bit. But you take, let's say, we're going to start with an artificial reef, right? You have an artificial reef. You basically do the engineering solutions right now, right? We know how to do that, but we also need to do the carbon accounting and that piece because that's really important, and it's not fully integrated yet. And then you need to get the ecosystem piece, and those don't all happen at the same time. What we know for the artificial reefs down here in our waters, if you want to put coral and other living creatures on it, you need to look at it for at least 3 years to see if you're getting the attachment. But somebody needs to set that standard and say they're going to do it. And different groups have, but no one is bringing this all together, and that's the vision. If we bring it together and we say, hey, here's a standard, help us out, maybe you could put it into regulation, but before that, we're going to say this is a good standard. And we're going to do this assessment. You're going to get the initial benefit from putting this thing physically in the water. And then we will also do the assessment on the carbon impacts. Like what happens to the chemistry when it's in this specific piece of water? It really depends on where it is. Then we will do the assessment to see whether or not the ecosystem returns are happening. And I can imagine there are other pieces. There's like community benefits, right? How would we quantify those community and health benefits for different pieces? And that's just like one of the ideas. We're also working on energy and clean cement, which goes into that. And I think in the future, we'll work on a lot of other issues. I think I'd be happy to just like have a conversation. I guess the piece that I would add to that is if we are going to have successful startups and even like incumbent companies succeed in the climate tech space, they really need to be able to deploy their solutions in a commercial setting. Like they need to get paid to do these deployments, and they have to do that in a super competitive environment where as soon as people are getting permitted, they're trying to build, right? They can't wait to another 8 months for this new material to be permitted. So we know we need to get those deployments. We need to de-risk the investments, and we need to actually function at the speed of the capital that's coming in. I think just to end it here with a big number from the UN. There's somewhere between 200 and 300 billion dollars a year deficit in the amount of adaptation we could do. A lot of that along the coast. We're doing about 20 or so billion dollars by their estimate. So like 10% of what we could do. And that's because we can't really quantify it, I think. Like, that's a big part of it, right? You can't properly quantify the full return that we're getting in the future, which is mostly from reducing future losses.
Thank you very much. And what I'd like to do now, we have a lot of expertise in the audience here, is just facilitate a broad discussion maybe rather than Q&A, but we can do some questions as well. And I don't have to prep one here because Mario.
So Dr. Treuer put his finger on what I think is getting increased attention, which is how you value ecosystem services and right in economic terms, the positive environmental externality of these natural systems. The New York Stock Exchange recently proposed a rule towards last fall, which was circulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission for comment, regulatory comment. It was withdrawn a couple of weeks ago, but before it was withdrawn, the docket collected a lot of very interesting comments from a lot of different people. And I put this question both to the panelists and to people I can see in the audience that would be eminently qualified, like you said, Dean Heithaus, to answer the question as well and to talk about it. What the PricewaterhouseCoopers and Ernst & Young's filed comment, so the rule was proposing a framework for natural asset companies to be able to list on the New York Stock Exchange, right? These are companies that hold mangroves or things that collect, that do natural carbon sequestration or what have you. And to be able to set them up as investment vehicles, they have to demonstrate that they have a balance sheet that's positive and that they are going to get some return on investment. It's exactly the calculation and the valuation that you were talking about, Galen. And what the PricewaterhouseCoopers were saying is this is a great idea, but the problem is that these are public goods for which, by definition, there is no market. And so, under generally accepted accounting principles, we don't see a rigorous way of putting a number on this that's reliable enough to be able to audit what these companies do. Ernst & Young and Pricewaterhouses, they audit the financial statements of publicly traded companies. And so we can't pass, if there's an investment fund that does ESG investing and they're saying we're not investing, we're taking these natural benefits into account when we do our investment. We had a great panel last year where a professor from Northwestern, Max Schatzenbach, said, there's a problem with these ESG investing, which is that they're violating fiduciary duty rules under ERISA and the Securities and Exchange Commission, because they are, instead of investing in the things that have the highest return on investment, they are investing according to other investment goals, which is different than what the law requires. And so the effort to say we're going to try to get, so people say this is an artificial problem. The reason why ESG investing is facing this problem is that these natural assets are not properly being valued and taken into account when the balance sheets are done and when the financial statements are drawn up. And so the question that I would have for you on the panel and for others, economists and finance professors in the audience, is how can we make headway in the valuation of these ecosystem services that are public goods, which by definition have no market, which by definition have no supply and demand that you can firmly look at, or no clear price signals that you can turn into a price. And where does that leave us if we can't accomplish that valuation of ecosystem services? I mean, ecosystem services are definitely a thing. They're definitely very valuable, just like any public good is definitely very valuable. But the problem of a numerical valuation is a very challenging one. And so how close are we to getting over that hurdle?
Well, I'll just start with, unfortunately, where we are the most precise and the best at doing that evaluation is when something like a fishery collapses. So we can evaluate the cost of the failure of ecosystem services, and we've done that over and over globally. I don't think, and Plab Mazumber's sitting here, and there have been some really good attempts at this stuff, but I don't know that we've done a really good job of showing the positive benefits while there's still positive benefits, right? I mean, we know it when it's gone, but it's really hard when it's there. That's how I think about it. You did a really great ecosystem model that tried to do this.
Jim, anything from the international blue carbon work that has attempted to do this?
Yeah, but it's only tangentially related to Mario's question.
Right.
So there's another challenge for most of the ecosystem goods and services for the coastal ecosystems, and that is land tenure for the areas that are producing those goods and services generally is not in private hands. So it's difficult to understand, say, if you do a blue carbon project to increase carbon storage offshore of Miami, who would the payments go to if no one owns that land off of Miami? It's part of the state. So we don't only have uncertainty in our valuations and our denial of the real values that have been hidden, we also have a land tenure rule that challenges current reward systems for the places where the benefits are being generated. So it's only tangentially related. But we see that. So red, paying people on land to keep carbon in trees is very straightforward because the people that own the land make the land decisions. In seagrasses where I work, where some of the most carbon-dense areas of the world, the carbon that's in those seagrasses will not be affected by the people the government that owns the seagrass deciding to keep it seagrass. It'll be affected by the people that live in the watershed changing their behavior to increase the water quality offshore, so they pay the price for the water quality regulation, and then the benefit accrues to the common good, and no one gets paid for it.
Yeah, I have a different perspective on it because I'm not an economist, but I'm so happy that people are doing this and finally trying to value it. And from the work that we do, we just see these benefits. The reality is we need to figure out how to do adaptation probably without that. And I think from the practical perspective, there's just a disconnect. And I worry that no matter how hard we work at these ecosystem valuations, we're not going to get them to a point where they'll be effective and affect change before we suffer the consequences of that change. And specific disconnects are what you said, the sort of disconnect between action and impacts, right? Which relates to another disconnect, that the benefits of these natural systems, particularly natural coastal ecosystems, are experienced at a scale once they scale up, right? When I talk about some of the coastal modeling, doing a living shoreline, one little living shoreline, isn't really going to do many coastal ecosystem benefits. You measure it on this project scale, comes out really bad, and let's not do that anymore. But if you did a policy that did 100 of them, but that's not where the benefit cost usually comes in. It's usually on an individual infrastructure project. So they're generally going to fail. The third disconnect is just, we have what you said, they're markets for these other things. They're really robust markets with many people who benefit, who have developed the real estate market and the energy market over these years with vested financial interests in figuring out how to value the goods and services they're doing. And we don't have that. I mean, there's a lot of us who care passionately about our natural ecosystems, but it's kind of a relatively newer thing. So just the level of energy and investment. So my concern is that even if we do that, we need other ways, through other sort of rationale for doing these things besides just that. But I don't think we should stop doing it. It was the last panel. It's not either or, it's both and, but those are just some of the questions.
Yeah, I just want to jump in quick. I have an opinion on this, and I just want to preface it by saying I'm not against markets, okay? I'm not anti-capitalist. No, this is really important because I think we get lost. We can use markets for a certain amount of decision making, and we don't use them for everything. We don't go to war over markets. There's a lot of choices we make that we don't leave to the markets or to cost benefit analysis, right? And so I think some of this is about ranking what's important to us and what do we do at what time. And the ecosystem services, I think we can get good enough and say it's minimum, and this is where we're going to use that decision. But and that's where I think we get to the work with the Army Corps. I would just like to have these pieces be able to be done at the same moment to a certain degree as the things that we can do very precisely. So I think that's where it helps us. And it also helps a startup. It helps a startup do their techno-economic analysis. That's super important to get the financing in. I don't think that we need to go to every community and be totally precise. We can say, yeah, we want our ecosystem back. How do we do it?
Now I'm going to ask an economist to weigh in. Paula.
Thank you so much. Yes, there are many different shade of economics thinking, how to use the economic tools and techniques into specific problems that has a public good, market failure, those kind of things, and especially environmental public goods, which are complex, challenging, doesn't have a lot of information about, and so on. So I fall in that category that economists or economics will not solve the major moral policy concern, whether you should mitigate or not, whether you should conserve or not, whether you should. Those are the policy level decisions. Market will not do a good job. But once you make that decision, we should mitigate, market will give you a very cost-effective instrument to achieve that goal and so on. So this is a very different use of, market is an instrument, it's a tool. And what level you are going to use as a society, we make that decision, and so on. So I fall into the second category, and I think market and financial instrument has a lot to offer to solve the scale of the problem we are dealing with in terms of climate risk and so on. And one of the specific thing I would say, we can do a lot of sophisticated modeling to generate precise number of dollar amounts, estimates, how much we are going to benefit, how much it will cost if we don't do certain things. But the key is how you are going to make that information useful so that moves the market. That means as an individual, as a buyer, as a seller, as a homeowner, all the market transaction we participate, how do we make a decision differently from what we do today? So for example, a lot of coral reefs, seagrass, marshland, mangrove, these are very valuable environmental public goods. But we still did not figure it out how your individual decision, how you're going to pay 2 cents more to contribute to that public good in a meaningful way. For example, Starbucks, you go, you don't mind to pay another 20 cents when you know it's an organic coffee or it's a fair trade coffee. It's not perfect, but they figured out to signal their product into the market mechanism. We have to come up with something. For example, coral reef, all coral reefs are not the same quality. There is a degraded coral, but if you look into the TripAdvisor or buy a tour, there's a lot of stars and comments. You can make decision which site you are going to go to. That's giving a signal. It's not necessarily, so you're basically, the trick is how do you make your buyers, consumers, homeowners to make certain decision that provides, that contributes towards that public good. Amazon 5-star is a gate which compresses many complex information into one scale. And buyers follow. When you're buying Amazon, you look into those scores. You look in the good one and bad one, and you get to make it. So, we need some useful information that can signal towards environmental public goods. So we can, when you're buying a house or, going for a recreational trip, we incorporate that information in our decision making. And I think it will be a great investment if we put enough resources to build those kind of platform for helping homeowners, for helping hikers, bikers, whatever, car buyers, to give some useful signal that helps towards contributing to those environmental public goods in reducing risk, increasing resilience, and so on. Thank you.
And now just to follow up on that a little bit, I think that I'm a scientist. I like to study things and be very sure that I'm right before I put it out there. But I wonder, we have big issues here. We could monitor the heck out of it while throwing spaghetti against the wall to not get to the 30-foot expanse seawalls. But what are the big stumbling blocks to getting there? And to do the big things we need to, as a homeowner who's worried about, will the gravity-fed systems work in a decade that for sewer? What are the big issues? I mean, we heard about regulatory challenges at lunchtime. Yeah, the ethical dimensions. Where's the gap so we don't study this until it's too late to respond?
Well, I want to start by somebody who grew up where actually gravity works. Well, it doesn't work here, right? We have the largest managed water system that I have ever seen in my life. Gravity doesn't matter here, right? So as the seas rise, so the South Florida Water Management does their best to sort of protect homes and lives. Maybe not so much, they could probably do better if they start thinking about water quality and downstream impacts. But I think one of the biggest things is we've set into place an infrastructure that has been managed and operated for decades and decades, and we cannot wean ourselves off of that, right? There's not a simple solution now to say, tear out all the canals and let's get this place put back together. We're past that point. So I don't know if Obey will talk about this in the next panel, but we somehow have to think about the whole system and how it's managed. Across the world, watersheds are being disconnected. We dam rivers, we block streams, we divert streams. In Florida, we've connected everything, right? We're connected all the way to the Kissimmee River and the other coast. We're connected to Orlando because of all of these human-built waterways. We have a waterscape that I don't know how you fix it now. I don't know where the first step is. What's the first gate you close and say that one's done and we're diverting water in a different way? I think that's one of the biggest issues we have is we are wedded and 100% dependent on an engineered system that doesn't work.
I think that issue of really looking at that scale and these engineered systems that have so much, it's almost like we need to deconstruct in some ways, because the cost is not just in building the infrastructure. The cost is the cost of maintaining and operating the infrastructure that we're saddling our communities with. And that's where I think the benefit of nature-based solutions come in more, because they can't do everything. There's going to be some we have to be very selective about the really high maintenance operational systems, because we're not the Dutch, okay? The Dutch don't have hurricanes. They also have they tax themselves a lot and have a 200-year old water management system. And I'm really tired of people telling me in New York that Miami and New York are not the Netherlands. We have hurricanes. We have grade D infrastructure maintenance grades, not massively managed water systems. We need low maintenance strategies that we can afford to maintain and operate. And so one of the things that has been I was asked to sit on this advisory panel for agencies on the White House. I think they were like, oh, she's going to talk about design. We should do more design. I was like, no, stop making your federal grants only about capital investments and put money in maintenance, operations, and monitoring and adaptive management. So one of the things I think that's, that the markets or the economists could really help with is sort of that life cycle cost, is really being able to kind of understand the life cycle costs between these two investments. Because I think, we've built a lot of infrastructure that's hard to maintain now that also fails with catastrophic results. And one of the things that's inhibiting a lot of large scale adaptive infrastructure now is the risk of failure, right? That we damage our ecosystems, that we damage people, and that's really scary. But I think we need to still make big investments in big infrastructure. We just need to, that's where I think economists and markets, we need to internalize those potential consequences, be realistic about them, because we can't build one living shoreline that's what's the Army Corps permit for now, one small living shoreline and monitor it and scale it up. I'm sorry, if you monitor that, the results are not going to tell you that it was beneficial to do this. It's not until you restore a whole, you're working at the scale of Biscayne Bay, right, to solve these problems where you're going to see those benefits. So you do need to act that big. There is risk of it going wrong and not working, but we already know the consequence of not doing it. So, yeah. No.
Yeah. I'm going to sort of address the question you raised about, for example, insurance companies giving me discounts and so on for mangroves, etc. Well, I do CAT modeling, and we basically take into account surface friction. We got 29 million grid points for Florida, right? So, for example, Miami Beach has these high rises, reduces surface winds, and that's accounted for through some kind of friction coefficient. And the question then becomes is whether we can take some of the ecological features like mangroves and convert them into some kind of friction coefficient. And that's what's missing. If you give us that, we can take that into account. That will have an impact on
there
the...
There are people doing this. I know some.
No, it's not, the point is that insurance companies are not going to take something like that, which is kind of a nebulous... when it comes to mitigation, for example, right, we do wind tunnel testing. We know, for example, you put up a shutter, what the reduction in losses may be. Those are concrete things that we can, which the insurance company... insurance companies have to be basically brought in kicking and screaming to give discounts, right? They're not just going to give it like that. There has to be some scientific basis. And we do have some precise, more, modeling, engineering modeling, and wind tunnel sort of information as to what the mitigation this thing. And we get substantial mitigation discounts in South Florida if you mitigate the house. But when it comes to things like mangroves and more general ecological sort of this thing, that's very hard to sort of quantify, as you said, and measure. But if we can do that, insurance companies would be willing to give discounts. Secondly, when it comes to flood insurance, premiums are so low relatively compared to the actual amount that the discounts you're going to get will not be much. It's not going to matter. For wind insurance, yes, it will. So that's, so insurance industry will be willing to give discounts if the information becomes, some scientifically justified information.
So Shahid, let me put this back on you. Where's the inflection point then where flooding is so expensive relative to what insurance companies can pay that we change the policies about building in the floodplain? Where's that inflection point?
Yeah, well, sure. If you restrict building in floodplains and all that, that would make a material difference.
That's what England did.
Yeah,
They
for
did
that
it
you need to have political will to do that.
Yeah. Part of the reasons they have they have a different kind of coastline. It looks different, but also in the past they lost things that were along the coast. And I don't know the reason that they haven't developed there, but I don't think that they subsidized it, which is what we did with NFIP.
Well, their coasts don't have the beaches that we do. So, there wasn't really much of a interest in building. You go to British coast, it's pretty,
No, I get
different.
it. Yeah. Can I ask a question, just really quick, on the friction? Is that just for wind, or is that also the friction coefficient?
It's for wind, but
surge?
we also have friction for storm surge. Yeah.
Okay.
I know people like the Barton, at ERDIC with the Army Corps and other have been looking at friction coefficients on different environments for storm surge and waves. It has, there are actually coefficients.
For sure.
And I think we got time. If we got one more question from the audience, I've been given the. Go ahead. Sorry.
This is my last opportunity to be here. First of all, I want to thank you, and I want to say hello to Yoka. I'm not home, and I represent Climate in the Dark. I'd like to really speak to you all again, so I'm going to be sending you email, but I'm here for my seniors who are dealing with issues of flood insurance increase, canals connected to Biscayne Bay. I'm from Little Haiti primarily. I'm a Brownsville technician, past landscaper, past soil tester, test air quality. Very difficult. It's not about just going to Home Depot anymore. A subcontractor coming out of public housing. I'm 62 and I'm a senior myself, but I will get in a truck, I will put my tools and my supplies together, I will go. I'm finding it easier to work with the as a member of Gen Cleo now, and as the BBC's 100 Resilient Women. I was trying to figure out why would anybody nominate me, but now that I think about it, and I listen to the terminology, I'm here to learn. I actually want a law degree. I didn't want it to be environmental law, but I think I need environmental law. It's business law. Going to keep business law, but we're going to talk about environmental law. I want to break the barrier. I want to tear down that barrier between those who are more interested in how climate justice affects us. And it's not just about climate gentrification. Some of us are on the breach. In Little Haiti, we were on the breach. We have a lot of flooding in Miami Gardens. I lived there. It's totally different from me being the person that I was or in the profession that I am, because my seniors touch all those issues, the ecosystems. We've got this big thing, though, with real estate. People saying that we're living in this glorious retirement place. I'm 62 now. That makes a difference. And watching other seniors come and find that we have lakes. And then 3 months after being here and being there, I've moved 4 times in less than 3.5 months because the mold, the moisture, but the investment in the realty there, the property managers, they're not scientific at all. Could you have your next meeting downstairs with us and our seniors? But what I'm saying is teaching the young folks in our community to talk about this from the different aspects you are. Look who's here. One of the things that motivated me to come here, I took a long drive. I'll take a long drive back. A lot of gas, on fixed income. I'm not working because I have mold disease. I've lived in units that were given to people who that passed inspection, but the pipes, I had to go to building and code. I wanted to go there before I left here. It's way down here, you know? I'm just appealing to you. First of all, I'd like to hear what each and every one of you, and I'd like to thank you so much. I learned I have tons of notes. I have to carry a Go camera. I have to translate this into Ebonics. Okay, at the senior center tomorrow, I have one HOA and another one. We do workshops. I've done toxic tours. I need you, but I need you to talk more about the inland, because what's happening at Biscayne Bay, I went over there and took a walk with them when they did the bay cleanup, North Bay Village, Virginia Key. Don't get many people that look like me or speak like me or care like me, but there are folks like Jen Cleo and Cleo that understand that, and other folks in other industries that listen to me. But when we get together on the educational part, you don't necessarily have to break it down to Ebonics. I'm pretty good with that. But what you need to do is talk about the marketing issues. What we need to talk about the influence and the data, access to the data. And right now, to be more specific, we're dealing with the CRA. It's no longer on 79th Street. It's a combination. I'm gonna be a little specific and I'll close up, because I need you to know what my scenario is on the inland. You know, when I first got involved, I heard those people don't know what climate justice means to me. Oh, buddy, but I do.
And I think I hate to do this because we do need to get to the next panel, but
So,
I want to give
get
one last question, I think, to Galen on this, which is how do we spur innovation and investment across our community and those who are not necessarily at the table, but we should be? Because I think that we can all agree we need to be doing the reach out in education we need to, but what do we need to do better as a community to make sure we're investing where we need to?
Yeah, hold on a second.
That this is what I want to talk to you about. You can't finish my sentence. You can't finish my perception. You've got to really hear me out, because I'm between this line and that line. But I firmly believe in education. I'm a panther, I'm a cat. Yeah. No, so I'm saying you feed me once a little bit of information and I always want more. But I want to know, how do we cut down that ethical divide, that cultural influence or lack of cultural interest, and learn how to communicate on that level? How do educators, how do facilitators, how do investors begin to reach out into African-American inner city communities or inner urban communities? And it's not just a landscaping issue, it's an environmental issue, it's a health issue, big time. My family's 11, single mom, raised 11 kids, okay? Check it out with the BBC. Okay, they got it right down to the basics. They didn't talk about me as a professional. They didn't talk about my level of education towards law school. They didn't talk about any of that. I want to know, how can we take ourselves as professional, and you got it good. You got it good. That's how he passed it to you, madam. You were great, too. You should have just taken the mic and walked around. But how do we cut that type of ignorance or lack of concern or lack of proper value or communication impediments? What commitment can I get from the educational or FIU to say that you'll bring this same conversation on that end of town, that you'll be inclusive to your young students and your inner city students, and how you can really connect with those of us who provide workshops and innovative services as landscapers, consultants, subcontractors, et cetera, because the CRAs will eat us up. I just need you to know the message and the intensity. Education is for everyone. Great conversation here, but the poor lady has to go back and put it in Ebonics, you know? All right? And I've got people that can communicate with you, but they won't communicate with us. But they will come and they will say, we want to build, we want to expand, and we want that Biscayne Canal. But you don't want to talk about the lakes that they're building on right now and how important it is for me to talk to realtors and how important it is to talk to journalists about how that impacts us right away. And the marketing is great, you know, but 7th Avenue is going to bring more commercial people in there. I got people, Teco Gas, sitting right there, but I've got about 19 blocks down there, those of us who have gas poisoning, who have sickle cell, who have cancer, and surviving it. Thank you so much for listening. Now you can continue on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Here, can I just respond real quick?
Yeah.
Matt, you have my phone number. No, I know. I just want to say, like, do reach out, and I hear what you're saying, and like my part of what I'm hearing is that, like, we're talking about the coastline. The richest people live on the coastline, and like, yeah.
Why don't those people really just don't know? I'm hearing that in the Museum of Science. And
Yeah.
House of Fire all the time. I bet you they don't know that we're listening.
And I would say, like, I think about this all the time, and the mayor talks about it, and like these issues are very, very real. Housing is going up. There's a ton of pressure on our community, and the insurance is going up. Insurance is so expensive right now, and it's just making it really, really difficult for folks. And I don't know how we do the transformation, but I do know we have way more money than we have in the past. Right now, we have like a chunk of money. We have to spend it well. And I do think some of it is about thinking about different scales. So, like, I really took a lot from you on that.
Yeah, and I could talk for ages on sort of climate communication, but I think, and engagement. But one of these things is, you know, as a consultant, we do a lot of resilience and adaptation planning. We always get this question like, we want to do equitable engagement. We said, okay, it means you've got to do like 10 meetings instead of one. You got to meet people where you are. You've got to provide childcare and food at the meetings. You've got to go to local community leaders and ask them who you should talk to and do it that way. And that takes a lot of work. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're not going to pay for that. You got $20,000 to do community engagement. But we want equitable engagement. And so, like, I think we need to think about the process. And I was in a panel with someone at New Jersey DEP who was working on their resilience project and said, when I get a proposal and for these resilience planning, for this sort of early planning and engagement to sort of set the goals, right? He's like, if they don't have 50% of their budget in community engagement, I know that they don't understand what we have to do here. So, you know, we need to invest in this sort of like economics, the technology, but this planning process is a big conversation too.
Totally. Sorry to cut you off. There is just like one thing that you guys can all do right now is like look at Google Blacks and Green. It's an organization in Chicago that's doing they're building wealth and health in their community, and I saw the founders of it speak at the Kampong, actually, where folks are going to go later. It's really, really interesting. And I just think it's like, if you are curious about a place where they're getting a solution and they've been funded by the EPA to be a resource for other communities, I think that's a good one to look at. And it's not on the coast, but we could do similar models.
And everything here is coastal at some level. But I want to thank our panel. Thank you all for being here, and look forward to the next one.